The Wooden Wonder, a British aircraft built from plywood, glue, and stubborn confidence. And it didn't just survive the Second World War. It humiliated the Luftwaffe. Because while Germany poured steel, aluminum, and engineering pride into building faster fighters and heavier interceptors, Britain built a plane that looked like it belonged in a furniture factory, and then used it to do things German pilots could not stop. It bombed targets in broad daylight. It outran the fighters sent to kill it. It hunted German night bombers over Britain. It carried spies and cameras deep into occupied Europe. It even served as a heavy fighter and a pathfinder, marking targets for the RAF's heaviest raids. This is the story of the de Havilland Mosquito, the wooden plane that made the Luftwaffe look helpless. To understand why the Mosquito was such an insult to German air power, you have to understand the assumptions of the early war. In the late 1930s, military aviation was moving fast, but one idea dominated. If you wanted a bomber to survive, you protected it with guns. More turrets, more gunners, more ammunition. Defensive firepower was the fashion of the day. That thinking produced aircraft like the Wellington, the Whitley, and in Germany, the Heinkel 111 and Dornier bombers. Aircraft that depended on formations and defensive guns to survive. But there was another idea, a dangerous idea. What if a bomber didn't carry defensive guns at all? What if it survived by being too fast to catch? That idea sounded reckless, almost suicidal. And yet, it was exactly the bet de Havilland was willing to make. Geoffrey de Havilland was not trying to build a conventional bomber. He wanted to build an aircraft that was a weapon of pure efficiency, speed, altitude, and precision. And then Britain was hit with a problem that changed everything. By 1940, strategic materials were becoming precious. Aluminum was in demand everywhere. Britain needed metal for fighters, for Spitfires and Hurricanes, for ships and tanks and everything else. Every new bomber meant more metal that the country could not easily spare. So de Havilland did something that sounds insane even today. He proposed building a high-performance combat aircraft, mostly out of wood. Not because wood was better in some magical way, but because wood was available. Britain had furniture factories, piano makers, cabinet builders, skilled craftsmen who could shape wood with incredible precision, and who were not currently being used to build metal airframes. And wood had advantages people underestimated. A wooden structure could be strong and light. It could be formed into smooth aerodynamic shapes. It didn't require the same heavy industrial capacity as aluminum aircraft. And crucially, it let Britain build advanced aircraft without competing for the same resources needed for frontline fighters. But the real genius was how de Havilland used wood. The Mosquito wasn't built like a wooden crate. It was engineered like a racing machine. The fuselage was made in 2 half shells, like a canoe. Each half was a sandwich, plywood on the outside, a lightweight core in the middle, and another layer inside, all glued together. Then the halves were joined into a sleek, strong body with minimal drag. This technique created an aircraft that was light, stiff, and fast. Very fast. And that speed is where the humiliation begins. When the Mosquito entered service, it could do something German pilots did not expect from a British bomber. It could outrun them. A typical early war bomber might cruise at 200 miles per hour. A German fighter like the Messerschmitt 109 was fast, but catching bombers was what it was built for. The Mosquito changed the rules. It was capable of cruising speeds that made interception difficult, and maximum speeds that made interception embarrassing. It didn't fly like a bomber. It flew like a fighter that happened to carry bombs. Now, the Mosquito story is not just one aircraft. It's a whole family of aircraft that did wildly different jobs, and that is part of why the Luftwaffe hated it. Because even if you figured out what a Mosquito was doing today, tomorrow it might be doing something else entirely. Let's start with the role that made the Luftwaffe look the worst. Daylight, precision strikes. The RAF, early in the war, suffered terrible losses. Bombers were slow, navigation was difficult, and accuracy was poor. So Britain shifted heavily to night bombing, where you could at least survive long enough to drop your bombs. But the Mosquito gave the RAF a different tool. A small formation of Mosquitoes could slip across the channel in daylight, hit a specific target, and be gone before German fighters could properly respond. And they didn't just bomb factories. They bombed symbols. They hit Gestapo headquarters. They hit prison walls to help prisoners escape. They hit radio stations and command centers. They hit targets that were humiliating because they were supposed to be protected. One of the most famous examples was a raid that did more damage psychologically than physically. The strike on the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen. Mosquitoes attacked at low level with terrifying precision. The very idea that British aircraft could appear at rooftop height, in daylight, in occupied territory, and destroy a specific building was a slap in the face to German air defense. But perhaps the purest humiliation mission was not even about bombs. It was about cameras. The Mosquito became one of the greatest reconnaissance aircraft of the war. Fast, high-flying, and able to carry cameras that could map entire cities. Reconnaissance was a deadly job. If you were caught, you died. And if you were slow, you were caught. The Mosquito could fly deep into Germany, photograph targets, and leave. German fighters would climb and chase, only to find the target had already disappeared. Imagine what that does to morale. You are a pilot, scrambled to intercept. You climb hard, burning fuel, trying to get above the intruder. And then you realize you are chasing a wooden airplane that is still pulling away from you. Germany built a reputation around technical superiority. They were the nation of precision engineering. The Luftwaffe had been terrifying in 1939 and 1940. And now they were being mocked by a plane made out of wood. And then the Mosquito did something even more insulting. It became a night fighter. The night war over Britain was brutal. German bombers came in the dark, guided by radio beams, trying to break British cities and industry. Britain responded with radar, searchlights, anti-aircraft guns, and fighter control systems, a whole machine designed to find and kill bombers at night. But you still needed an aircraft that could catch them. Early night fighters were often too slow, too heavy, or poorly equipped. Then the Mosquito arrived with airborne radar and heavy cannon. Now you had a hunter in the darkness that could catch German bombers, and later even catch German night fighters. This is where the humiliation becomes personal. Because the Luftwaffe didn't just lose bombers to it, they lost the feeling of control over the night sky. A Mosquito night fighter would be guided toward a target by ground radar. Then its onboard radar would pick up the bomber ahead. The pilot would close in silently. No warning, no tracer fire until the last moment. Then a burst of cannon, and another German bomber would vanish into the night. German crews began to fear the Mosquito the way Allied crews feared the German 88. Not because it was big, but because it was effective, and it was always there. And the Mosquito was not fragile either. Yes, it was made of wood, but that didn't mean it was weak. It could take damage and still return. It could fly with holes in the structure and keep going. It could operate from rough airfields. And it could be repaired in ways that sometimes were easier than patching a metal aircraft, because skilled woodworkers were everywhere. Another strange advantage: wood did not show up the same way on some early radar interpretations, and the Mosquito's small size and speed complicated interception even further. Now, to be honest, it wasn't magic. Mosquitoes were shot down. Crews died. The aircraft had weaknesses. It could burn if hit in the wrong place. It needed careful manufacturing and quality control, especially with glue, because early on there were concerns about how some adhesives behaved under certain conditions. And as Germany introduced faster fighters like the Focke-Wulf 190 and improved night fighters, the Mosquito's advantage narrowed in some situations. But even when the gap narrowed, the Mosquito still forced Germany to react. And forcing the enemy to react is power. Germany had to spread its defenses. It had to keep fighters on alert. It had to invest in radar coverage, anti-aircraft belts, and night interception. Every time a Mosquito appeared, it dragged German resources away from other fronts. And the Mosquito did not appear in small numbers. More than 7,000 were built, not as a desperate one-off, but as a mass-produced weapon system. And the roles kept multiplying. It served as a pathfinder, marking targets for heavy bombers, with flares and markers. That job required accuracy, speed, and the ability to get in and out. Perfect Mosquito territory. It served as a fighter bomber, carrying bombs under the wings and cannon in the nose. It could destroy trains, trucks, radar stations, and airfields. It could fly low and fast, hit hard, and vanish. It even served as an intruder over German airfields at night. Think about that. British aircraft hunting German night fighters as they tried to land, when they were low on fuel and most vulnerable. That isn't just combat. That's psychological warfare. The Mosquito became the aircraft that turned the Luftwaffe's own night war back on them. And then there's perhaps the most brutal part of the humiliation. The Germans tried to copy the concept. They understood what the Mosquito represented: a fast, versatile platform that could do almost anything. And because it was so effective, Germany attempted to build their own equivalent. But by the time Germany was seriously trying, the war economy was collapsing under pressure. Fuel was scarce. Pilots were scarce. Factories were being bombed. And Germany's ability to mass-produce a reliable Mosquito-style aircraft just wasn't there anymore. So the Mosquito remained uniquely British in impact, a symbol of a different philosophy. Not bigger, not heavier, not more complicated, just smarter. And that philosophy shows in the numbers. Mosquitoes flew some of the most dangerous missions with comparatively lower loss rates than heavy bombers. They achieved effects far beyond their size. They made commanders rethink what was possible. If you step back, the Mosquito is not just a great airplane. It's an argument. It's proof that you can win with speed instead of armor, that you can win with precision instead of mass, that you can take an inferior material, wood, and turn it into an advantage so extreme it embarrasses the most feared air force in Europe. That is why the Mosquito humiliated the Luftwaffe, because it attacked the Luftwaffe's identity. Germany wanted to be the masters of the air through engineering excellence. And then Britain showed up with a plane that looked like it was built by carpenters and used it to outrun their fighters, outsmart their defenses, hunt their bombers, photograph their cities, and strike their headquarters. A wooden aircraft should not have been one of the most advanced combat machines of the war. But it was. And the Luftwaffe never truly solved it. Even at the end of the war, when Germany was throwing jets into the sky, the Mosquito was still flying missions, still marking targets, still hunting at night, still making a joke out of the idea that wood meant obsolete. The Mosquito didn't just win battles. It won embarrassment. It forced German pilots and commanders to admit something they hated admitting. They had been beaten by a plane they should have been able to destroy. A plane that had no defensive guns in its original bomber form. A plane that relied on speed, not brute force. A plane that proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in war is the one that looks the least threatening. So the next time someone tells you the Mosquito was famous because it was made of wood, remember the real reason. It wasn't famous because it was wooden. It was famous because it worked. And because it made the Luftwaffe look powerless. That is humiliation on a strategic level. And that is why the de Havilland Mosquito remains one of the greatest aircraft ever built.